to get authentication working with Firebase because they offer that as well. Let's have a look at that. So authentication right here. Whole separate section of Firebase, another service that they offer. So let's follow the instructions on that blue button and set up a sign-in method. Beautiful. We have email, password, phone, Google, Play Games, Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, Anonymous. Let's do Google authentication. That sounds fun. Click that. Click Enable. Google sign-in is automatically configured on your web apps. Cool. All right, that's most of it. All right. So let's go to the documentation. If we hit a little help up here, let's see what we actually need to do in our code. Authentication, auth, sign-in methods help. Let's look at that. Developer documentation is what we wanted. Here we go. Under Firebase documentation, authentication. Let's look at Google sign-in. Before you begin, add Firebase to your JavaScript project. We did that part. In the Firebase console, open the auth section on the sign-in method, enable Google sign-in, and click Save. Did that. So now we need to handle the sign-in flow with the Firebase SDK. It says to create an instance of the Google provider object. Provider equals new Firebase auth.Google auth provider. So in all of these cases, however we're logging in, we're using something called OAuth, which is a standard for authenticating against third-party services and so on. So that's what we're using under the hood, but we don't need to know how OAuth works because Firebase hides all the hard work from us. So new Firebase auth, Google auth provider. Who got this working? Anybody get this working? Sweet. So back in base.js, we need to import one more thing. Let's import Firebase/auth in addition to Firebase app and database. So now we're using 3 areas of Firebase: app, database, and auth. Then we can say provider is new database auth.Google provider. Let's do authentication. Configure authentication. We don't use var, we use const, right? Const provider equals new firebase.auth.Google auth provider. And we might have more than one means of signing in someday, so I'm going to call this Google provider. Const Google provider equals new Firebase auth Google auth provider. Const is misspelled. Thank you. And you know what? I'm going to be using this in another file, so I'm going to export it. So remember, in addition to exporting default, you can also have named exports. So export const Google provider means I can import Google provider from another file. So once I have this provider, optional, nah. Optional, nah. Optional, nah. There we go. Authenticate with Firebase using the Google provider object. You can prompt your user to sign in with their Google accounts either by opening a pop-up window or redirecting to the sign-in page. We'll do pop-up window. That's easier for us on this web browser. So to sign in with pop-up window, call sign in with pop-up. So we're going to call firebase.auth, open close parens, sign in with pop-up. So what I'm going to do is export const auth equals firebase.auth, open close parens. So I'm going to export this part from base.js so I can import it elsewhere and call sign in with pop-up on it. So I'm going to export two new things here. Let me update my base.example.js accordingly. Okay. I'm pasting this in Slack as well. And I imported Firebase auth at the top. Don't forget that. You do have to import something extra. So I'm not going to post my base.js, but I will post my base.example.js. So then where do I want to use this? Where do I want to call this? How about sign in? Seems legit. So here's my form right now. Inside my form, I have the label and the input and the button. I'm going to comment all those out for the time being. Never mind signing in with a username and password. I'm going to stick my new button in here. It'll be a button of type button, not submit, just button. It'll say sign in with Google. I will keep that nice CSS there, though. And I'll give it an on-click of this.authenticate. So in sign in, I'll add a new method at the top. Authenticate. And that's where I'll call sign in with pop-up. So I need to import a couple things from base.js in here. So let's import not the default export base, but the named exports auth and Google provider. Right, because I had export const Google provider and export const auth, I can import them here from /base. Then I'll call auth dot, I'm looking over at my documentation here, sign in with pop-up, pass in my provider, which is Google provider. And then they have this then business. What's that all about? Anybody know what that is? Anybody seen something like that before? .then. So sign in with pop-up happens asynchronously, meaning it happens in the background. So if we want the result of signing in, like say that gives us some sort of result, and we want to do something with that, well, if we try to just like console log result on the next line, wouldn't be there because sign in with pop-up is still running. It happens in the background while the code continues executing on subsequent lines. So if you want something to happen when that's finished, you got to do one of a couple things. And the way this works, sign in with pop-up returns something called a promise. Anybody ever heard of that? We won't get into promises in a lot of detail in this class. There's just not time. I mean, we don't use it enough. But long story short, if something returns a promise, then you can call .then on that promise and pass in a callback function that will run whenever the thing finishes. So if you have something that runs asynchronously, that is, runs in the background, you can make sure that that thing has finished by putting .then and then passing it a function to run after it finishes. So we see that they've done that here, .then. And they have a function in there that takes a result as an argument. But we don't use the keyword function. We use arrow functions so that we don't get mixed up with this. So we'll pass some sort of result object. So let's just console log result whenever we get that. Now, this way doesn't work. But this will. So this will wait until sign in with pop-up has actually finished. Then whenever that is, it'll call our function here and log the result. Let's see if it works. Let's sign out. Let's sign in with Google. Oh, look at that. There's my pop-up. Let's log in as Gmail me. Hey, it logged something. Some sort of object. Additional user info, credentials, user. User looks juicy. Oh, yeah. Look at all that. I see display name and email and UID. Photo URL. Ooh, I bet that's my my avatar. Sweet. Okay, neat. What if we, instead of console logging it, remember handle auth? What if we called this .props.handle auth? So this result thing was this object that had a key called user, right? And then that was the user object. So what if I said const user equals an object with display name, user.displayname, and email, user.email. What else did I want? UID, right. UID, user.uid. Then I call handle auth with that user. How about that? Oops, result. Sorry. Const user equals result dot user, and then pass this in. Yeah. Like this. And we learned last week, instead of const user equals result dot user, we could also do this. Use restructuring assignment. Const curly brace user equals result, and that'll just get result dot user and assign it to a variable called user. Do you see what I'm doing? So I'm actually taking the user I got back, taking the properties that I want out of it, and calling handle auth with that. And I know sign in with pop-up will have finished by then because of .then. Because sign in with pop-up returns something called a promise. And that, I hear, is how those work. So let's see. Sign in with Google. There we are. I'm signed in, and instead of saying my username up here, it actually says my name from Google. Let's look at app here. App user. Yeah, check that out. Got my actual UID, my email, my display name. Totally worked. Yeah. No. It is what sign in with pop-up eventually returned. So, which I just get out of the documentation here. It gives me some sort of result that has, and I wanted to see what that was. So the promise is what's actually returned here. A promise is a thing that you can call .then on. So then .then takes a callback, and what argument is passed into that depends on the thing that you're actually doing. There's nothing inherent about promises that makes that receive a particular argument. That I get out of because that's how sign in with pop-up works. It's going to give me some sort of result or response, and yeah, I just got that out of here. So it's something with a user object. I could tell because I console logged it. So that seems to work. I seem to be able to sign in as my Google selves. This is Gmail me. Sign out. Sign in with Google. Oh, this is fretless me now. This is fretless me. Yeah. Feels pretty good. Now, I'm never signing out. Not really. So what happens when I say sign out? I clear out state, and I clear out local storage. But I didn't do anything to actually sign out with Firebase, did I? If you keep reading here, eventually you'll notice firebase.auth.signout will actually sign you out. So we're staying signed in, actually, until we do that. So in my sign out function, I could actually call auth.signout. Well, I could if I had actually imported auth, but I haven't. So in app.js, we could import, that's a named export, auth from base ./base. Then in my sign out function, actually call auth.signout. So that'll sign me out for real. Sign in, sign out. Feels good. Add Google authentication with Firebase. Cool.